Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 44 of Daffy's Roundtable. It's time to talk about more dart frogs. In this episode, we sit down with Mark Pepper to hear the story of Understory Enterprises, how it was first founded, the work that was done to get dart frogs from Peru all the way to hobbyists in Canada, and just general dart frog husbandry. I'm super excited for you all to hear this episode. But before we do that, allow me to give a huge thank you to Exoterra for sponsoring the podcast and making this episode possible. Exoterra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. Okay, let's get into this week's conversation with Mark Pepper, founder of Understory Enterprises. Mark, hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you very much for joining me today.
No problem.
Super excited to have you on and super excited to talk frogs as always.
No problem.
So maybe let's just jump right in. How did you, before we get into all the understory talk, how did you initially get into the hobby and start keeping frogs?
I've always liked frogs and snakes since a little kid. Probably had my first exposure to dart frogs or colorful tropical frogs sometime around kindergarten, watching the Nat Geographic video that came out, coinciding with their, I guess it was probably a 1983 issue. And ever since then, I've been fascinated with the idea that somewhere in the world there's frogs that are red and blue and green, and well, I guess we have green frogs in Canada, but all these colorful little poison frogs. So, and then after that, I was 17 before I was able to find any in Canada, and I got those at a reptile expo from Port Credit Pet Center, and sort of started from there. So.
Awesome. Okay, and then so how long between that and between the inception or the starting of Understory Enterprises?
Well, I guess Understory started when I was in university, so I was probably 19 or 20. I guess it'd be about 20. So I would buy whatever I could find, which was at that time there's hardly anything in Canada. So I started importing probably by the time I was 20 years old, which would be back around the year 2000 maybe. I had no other options other than to start importing from the States and trying to get new stuff that way. So I guess very quickly had to become a business in some sense. I had to obviously justify spending all this money on frogs, so I breed them so I could buy more. And I never intended it to be my life's path, it's just a hobby. But I sort of used what money I make selling frogs to buy more and help pay for school too. And then before I knew it, I was making enough in by second or third year in university. I thought that maybe there might be something to this. But I realized the market in Canada was almost non-existent at that time, so I knew I needed to export, and that's when I started shipping, exporting to the United States, and then not long after that to Japan and Europe, and that's where it sort of really took off.
What is Understory Enterprise? What do you guys do?
Well, we're just breeders of primarily poison frogs. At this time, exclusively poison dart frogs or arrow frogs, whatever you want to call them. In the past, we bred tons of tree frogs, mantellas, and all that. But right now, exclusively with dart frogs, and we'll have mantellas again in the future. And then on top of the frogs, we do a lot of plants. We've really expanded into kind of the terrarium plants, not so much the big house plant stuff, but I'd like to focus on the obscure terrarium plants. So we import stock from Peru for those, from Ecuador occasionally, and then obviously get from other collectors too. So we want to have a large selection of terrarium plants. My goal is to have as many site-specific plants as we can offer, so that people can have a certain locality of frogs, especially like Peruvian stuff, and then the plants that naturally grow alongside the frogs in nature, so that they can have as biotope specific as possible terrariums.
That is awesome. Now you said you're importing the plants from Peru and Ecuador and places like that. Are you also importing the frogs, or are the frogs bred here in Canada?
All the frogs we sell are bred here in Canada. We import stock from Ecuador, obviously, from Peru, which we've done for many years, just small amounts for breeding stock. I have in the past imported other species from Europe, but I don't primarily import from Europe. But everything we do sell is bred right here in Canada. So we only import for breeding stock. We only import small numbers for breeding stock. And then with Waikiri from Ecuador, we also import, which I'm not sure what the correct term is, but we import only pre-ordered animals, I guess, for other collectors too. And then we distribute them that way. So
awesome. And is it directly from Waikiri to over here in Canada, and then I guess you maybe ship off whatever is for the USA orders, or does it stop in the US and then get shipped
No,
over
so
again?
like here they come right to Canada, and then we ship them. Within a couple of days, we ship them on to the end customer. So Waikiri has another distributor in the States, Indoor Ecosystems. They also handle our U.S. exports. They're our U.S. distributor too, so they handle Waikiri stuff, goes right to them. We don't handle American orders from Waikiri, just Canadian ones, and a little bit of Japanese ones too.
Awesome. That's very cool. Okay, now I've done a little bit of diving on your. I've actually been on your website for many years now. I kind of enjoy going through the blogs
It's
and
terribly
reading all the stuff.
outdated.
Yeah, but the blogs are very interesting.
Yeah.
And in some of the blog posts you talk about your experiences going to Peru and sort of the initial finding of the frogs. Was your trips to Peru more of on the tourism, I want to see frogs kind of thing, or were they business trips?
No, from the start, it was with the intent for business. So when I was it's probably back in 2001, I got an email from a fellow in Peru, Manuel, wanting to export frogs. And obviously, I was really interested if we could set something up. And he assumed at the time that he'd be able to export them like he could with dried insect specimens. Which was his previous business. And they had what's called the calendario de casa for the insects at that time, which was essentially a quota system that allowed the dried desiccated specimens for hobbyists or whatever, for pinning and art purposes. They could export certain amounts then. And he assumed that the frogs would fall into the similar thing and he'd be able to, collect and export. And so anyway, he wanted to start, see if there's any way we could do some business. And I said, well, I'd be really interested in acquiring Peruvian stuff. At the time, there's very little on the market. So I told him, we'll look into it. I'm really, really interested. And he got back to me in a couple of weeks and said, essentially, it's a lot more complicated than I thought. There's this thing called CITES. We have to set up a zoo criadero, which means spend like a breeding facility. And he's like, yeah, I'm sorry. It wasn't all like I thought. It's going to be really, really complicated and it's going to take years to set up and it's going to cost some money. And I thought, well, if I want to do this as a living, I need to have something kind of unique because, it's going to be a hard sell to sell common species into Europe or to reach the market I need. But if I can get something started in Peru, then I think I'll have a kind of a unique opportunity to offer new legally sourced animals to the market. And that would hopefully help drive the sales of other species, more common trade species that I was breeding as well. So I went down soon after that. I think it was 2002 was probably my first trip to Peru to meet with Manuel. And we got everything started. And from then it took 3 years to get all the permits in play, like various stages of permits. Obviously, Manuel's handled all this. So was a wonderful asset. I never could have done anything without Manuel, pushing papers down in Peru and making sense of all the bureaucracy and all that stuff. It was, an incredibly long process, but it took from the time we got started legally with it, from the time we filed all the requests and all the, registered when he registered the business down there and all that stuff, it took just over 3 years before we got our first export. So that was in, I think, October of 2005 was the first shipment that came out of Peru with CITES.
Wow. And so that's all on the Peru side. Was it equally as complicated on the Canadian side?
No. So when you and it's still this way in Canada. So to import CITES animals into Canada, all you need is an export permit from the country of origin.
Oh, okay.
Private people can do it. It's better to do it as a business, just for a little bit for tax reasons. But no, so you need obviously you need a receipt, you need your CITES, you need your airway bill, and I think that's about all you actually need. And then you go prepare your document package, take it to customs. Essentially, they'll assess the tax on it, and the way you go, as long as your permits are in order, then it's pretty. The Canadian side was all straightforward. It was the Peruvian stuff, getting the approval for the zoo criaderos, first step, and then getting your collecting permits for a certain amount of breeding stock, and then actually breeding them and waiting for the whole life process. And then having the inspections, there's inspections every step of the way for egg to tadpole to froglet, and then froglets large enough to export, and then all, it just took time. And everything it seemed painfully slow at that time. Now I'm completely used to, waiting. 3 years doesn't seem like a long time to wait for something now, but when you're a 20-year-old kid wanting desperately to get something started, it was pretty painful to wait that long. But
yeah, 3
but in
years
the
for
meantime,
waiting
I
for
was
frogs.
traveling to Peru, using every excuse I could to get back down to Peru, and we go look for obviously new stuff, and explore what we thought were unknown regions, and so it was an interesting time for sure.
That's very cool. So you were actually part of the inception of creating I guess, the breeding farm down there.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time working with Manuel, showing him what to do. But I can't take any credit for any of the work on the ground. I mean, he made everything possible, but I would guide him as best I could, and took a lot of trips with him. I was spending, at that point in time, I'd go down probably 8 or 9 times a year down to Peru to oversee things, build terrariums, build cages, and then obviously the fun part was traveling. So I always like going to new spots. I still do. Hopefully find new species or new color morph. I don't think there's a lot of new species left to be found, but there's sure dozens and dozens and dozens of new color morphs of different species out there yet. So.
Have you ever discovered the new species?
Yeah, a couple, not indirectly. I don't think I found one that I ever thought was a new species right off the bat. Like Amarega pepperi was one that I thought was a new form of basseri until they sequenced it, and Evan Toomey realized the call was different, but my ears are terrible for things like that, so I didn't. Audibly, I just thought it was a basseri a little farther to the south. Renino Mea Benedict was one we discovered with Evan Toomey as well. And that at the time, we just thought it was a fantastic new form of Renino Mea fantastica. But then genetically and geographically is, isolated to a little different area geographically, but we assumed at the time it must be a new form of fantastica. But again, this is all before molecular, all the molecular genetic stuff really took off. It was just, at the dawn of that. So Evan and Jason were the kind of first guys on the scene. Evan Toomey and Jason Brown, so I'm talking about, that had access to the laboratories in the United States. So they would sequence this stuff and that shed light on that this actually a new species, or this is just another morph of the species, and all stuff that was way over my head. But it was neat to work with those guys.
That's very, very cool. Is it Peppery after Mark Pepper?
Yeah, they named it after me sometime 2009, or I'm not sure when the paper came out, but they named that one after me. I was, and a couple other species were described in that paper as well. So.
That's really cool. You have a frog named after you.
Yeah, I do.
That's really cool. Okay,
Thanks.
awesome. So when you mentioned going out and collecting and looking for a new species, was every new species a new permit that you had to acquire to have them as breeding stock, or was it sort of we're doing dart frogs? Any dart frogs is included?
No, it wasn't that easy. So Manuel, again, he did all the paperwork. So we would apply. He would apply for, say we want a Renino Mea imitator. He would say I'd like 64 specimens, and then they would argue with that, send it to the legal team in Lima, and then maybe in a year we'd get a quota for 60 or 50 or whatever. And then every time, so you get your permit, and there's a guia. So once you do your collecting, you have to sort of go into the local. It was at the time in Reina and now Serfor, but you would have to get a guia de transporte if it was collected in a province. So we were based in Loreto, and then so he would have to get, when he went collecting, he would bring them to the post or whatever of Serfor or in Reina, and you have to get a guia de transporte, which is a transfer permit from one departmental or province to bring them back to the breeding facility in Iquitos. And then they stayed in Iquitos, and then they're under supervision in Reina. So everything that was collected for the breeding farm remains property of the Peruvian authorities. Essentially, it's just their Manuel's or ours or whatever for the breeding purposes, and the offspring we had the rights to export. But all the parental stock remained in custody of Manuel, and so they could take them back at any time if they deemed something was amiss or whatever. But the collecting was limited to breeding stock, different species or different populations, whatever we had permits for at the time. So for the first years, we were constantly applying for new permits for new species and working that way. So.
Very, very cool. And now is it sort of set up in a lab sort of setting, so the frogs are indoors in terrariums, or are you?
So we did a sort of a hybrid thing. We had a big lot in Iquitos that we did for the first couple of years. We had a lot of cages we built. They're about, if I remember correctly, 3 meters front to back, 2 meters wide, and about 2 meters tall, all screened in, double layers of screen with doors that you could open and walk in. We planted those up The frogs did really well like that, but we kept having trouble with spiders getting in and catching frogs. So
Okay.
then I think we were bringing in egg sacs when we were collecting the leaf litter. So then we just switched everything into kind of European style, what you think of for dart frog breeding. It's all inside with air conditioning and everything like that.
Awesome.
And they did obviously just as well that way too. But it's kind of neat to have them in the open air. I think their behavior is a little bit more interesting watching. You give them all that space actually in the environment, but yeah, we kept having issues, and we had there's Aikido's at that time. There's rogue cats everywhere, so you'd find that the cats would be on top of the cutting. There's just little problems you never imagined. So it was much easier to manage everything, having them all completely, even though they're in a walled-in lot right inside of the city, it was better just to have them and easier to manage, I guess, and to have an idea of what we actually have for stock and what's breeding. I mean, it's easier in a 20-gallon terrarium to know what's going on than a
Sure.
200. I don't know what the equivalent would be, probably 500-gallon cage or something that you can walk around in. So.
Yeah, you can't even find the frogs sometimes when it's
Well,
that
they're
big.
actually surprisingly visible, but you never know exactly what's going on or where the eggs are if you're stepping on something. So we eventually made the switch to, and it made it easier to come time, like especially for Manuel when inspections, when they want to see something, if the inspector, the authorities are there looking for something, when you're kind of rooting around a huge cage, and it's just a lot easier to point out something in a terrarium and have your inventory outlined there than in larger cages. So.
For sure. Did the authorities give you was it a big headache? Were they pursuing you guys for a while?
No. It's all it's just paperwork, right? Mammal, breeding for us is not hard.
Right.
It takes time. It never been done in Peru before, something like that. So, but there's never been issues as far as that. It's just for me that my headache with it was just waiting, just the processing time, the bureaucracy. The wheels move slowly down there. They did at that time anyway. It seemed like. So no, it's just the frogs are easy to breed. I mean, everyone in the world's breeding dart frogs now. It's not hard. You feed them, you give them the right humidity, you're going to get eggs before long. Then you're going to get tadpoles, and then you're going to have froglets. So the hardest thing for us was, getting a source of springtails that would live in the climate down there. So that was probably the key when Manuel isolated a kind of springtail that we could produce easily down there. Then that made producing whatever amount of froglets we needed quite easy. So that was the hard part, was always the food. We'd get flightless flies in from the lab, and they'd be flying in no time. But so we give up on flightless flies. Every fly he's ever fed is flying around down there, but the frogs don't care. So
That's really cool. So so the springtails that we have here in the hobbies don't work down there.
I don't know. I never brought any. I assumed they would,
Okay.
but I didn't want to risk having a bag full of springtails and getting
Sure.
hauled into customs in Lima and ruining my reputation or my name, or I don't know how they look on it, so I never risked it. So I assumed they would do just fine, but we didn't have access to any other springtails. We had to find a kind, and Manuel eventually found a kind that cultures really well, and it looks very similar to what we have here, but
Awesome.
a little more robust.
Yeah, were you able to? I guess I don't know if this question even makes sense, but were you able to collect any insects there that would have been good feeders or alternates to fruit flies?
Yeah, Manuel, he's tinkering around over the years with different grasshoppers and stuff like that, but crickets. He his first interest was insects, so he's played around with a lot of that kind of stuff. But now we're just strictly on fruit flies, and we collect occasionally a kind of termite that the frogs really like too, which is really nice to have that nice fatty food source down there that we don't have up here. So yeah, just flies, springtails, and occasionally collected termites. But yeah, in the past he did a lot more with some crickets and stuff like that. But I don't think he ever had a kind that would breed the North American ones. Like you get hundreds, but you'd never get tens of thousands. So it was never. And I don't know if it's just a thing to do with, a trait of the species he was raising, or just maybe poor knowledge, or just something they're missing from their diet. But he never got to the point where there's we get a boom in crickets we do when we raise crickets here. Like, I don't know if you've hatched pinheads, but
Yeah, lots.
Cloud of pinheads when they hatch right. So
For sure, yeah. Or even the amount of fruit flies you get from just one culture is
yeah. Well, yeah, it's so easy to do fruit flies. It's almost mindless. So
Okay, so now that you have everything set up and you're doing all that, do you remember what the first frog or the first couple of frog species that you imported
Oh
into
yeah,
Canada was?
yeah. The first two we exported were Rhininaea reticulata and Rhininaea amazonica.
Awesome.
At the
Okay.
time, Amazonica was called Ventrimaculata. There was no official Amazonica, so they came as Ventrimaculata, and only in later sets of permits then they would come as Amazonica. But this was before all these nomenclatural changes. So yeah, those are the first two, Amazonica and Reticulata.
Awesome. And now it's just many, many more species.
Yeah, I don't. I have to sit down and figure out how many
Yeah.
species and morphs over the years, but there's been. I mean, we've been doing it for. It'll be. Maybe 19 years, I guess. This 19
Wow.
or 18 years this year that we've been exporting. So it's we took a few years off during COVID, and but yeah, a lot of stuff's come out. So
You also acquired some land down in Peru just for like conservation reasons. Do you want to maybe talk about that for a minute?
yeah, we had the opportunity. This was again really early on in Chizuta, which is for poison frog people. It's kind of a hot spot. There's about 8 species in 1 hectare there, so we had the opportunity to buy a small plot of land up in Chizuta that was loaded with frogs. So I think it's not quite 10 hectares maybe, which is less than. I'm not sure how it works out into acreage, but roughly let's say 20 acres. It's very small in the grand scheme of things, but it's kind of neat that Jason Brown. There's been a lot of research done on poison frogs there, and what's the Japanese version of the BBC's filmed the series there. So it's kind of neat that it has been used for some interesting stuff beyond what we purchased it for. We just wanted to sit on it. At least there'd be a little spot for a few more years that there'd be frogs around Chizuta, but there still are tons of frogs around Chizuta. But yeah, so there's that. We got a small 23 acres outside of Iquitos or something like that, or 23, I guess it's hectares. And then in Tarapoto where we have the house at. So yeah, we have a few pieces, but I mean, for conservation purposes, it's good for a while, I guess. But I mean, ideally you want it needs if it doesn't back into a larger protected area at some point. It's not my lifetime, probably not my grandkids' lifetime, but at some point it's going to dry up if everything else around it is chopped down. So.
For sure.
Which I'm not too, in Chizuta, it's pretty rugged slope, but the properties around Iquitos are quickly getting encroached upon. I mean, the city's growing, the urban sprawl is quickly, quickly moving its way. Iquitos and Nauta at some point are almost going to connect, and so that's just the way the world goes. But.
For sure. And you mentioned something about building a house just now. Sorry, in
Yeah, we
Iquitos?
had a house for a couple of photo that we had on Airbnb, and we had a bunch of friends stay there and whatnot, kind of like base camp for us when we're traveling through Tarapoto. And yeah, we built. I don't know when we built that. Now everything's been a blur. I just got back to Peru for the first time in 3 years in December of this past year, so I'm not sure my timeline for when stuff happened. So everything kind of stopped for a few years for me. So, but probably 5 years ago we finished that. Maybe.
That's very cool. So you said you were just there. For
There in
how was
December.
how
Yeah.
was that? And did you? You said you hadn't been there in a while. Did you see any big differences in like loss of species of frogs or plants or
No,
anything like that?
actually, I was surprised. So prior to 5 years ago, say they repaved the Highway 5N, or what we call the Carretera Tarapoto Yurimaguas. So they cut down a lot of the forest and the vegetation on the roadside, but that's all. I was surprised to see all the vegetation back right up to the road. So we'd find species like Amarega bass or Entrilitata right alongside the road again, which I hadn't seen in 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
Or 10 years since they were doing the construction. So we used to initially find frogs right down to the road. Imitator now you find right at the road again in the Heliconias. So I saw actually more stuff than with minimal effort than I ever thought. There's been years since we've seen that many frogs right along the road, which is really nice to see the vegetation come back and the area recover from the construction. Where else did we go? Yeah, everywhere we went, we found, except for one forest that other people on the internet have touched on already in the frog world, the Panguicanarachi forest, or kilometer 7, we called it, the lowland fantastica. One of their main localities has been completely cut down. But again, that we've been waiting for that for years. It's a 45-hectare piece of land, and everything around it is basically going to oil palm, Palm africana. So it was a matter of time. But it's sad to see that because many people, frog people, would always go there because it's a great spot. You see lots of frogs. That was my negative. I saw everything else. I was surprised how good everything. The populations that we saw. We didn't do a ton of traveling. It was more a fun trip. I hadn't seen Manuel in almost 3 years. I went down with a couple of friends from up here, so we spent a lot of time around the pool and having a good time. But it wasn't so much a herping trip, but more of a just celebrating if I can get back to travel and things
Get back to
normal. Yeah. So
where in general do you find the dart frogs? And based on that, do you think we as keepers are actually setting up our vivariums correctly?
oh, that's a good question. No, so poison frogs, a lot of them do really well in disturbed habitats. So they're it's kind of if people cut a trail through something, you'll find them along trail side often because it sort of opens up the canopy a bit, and then the plants, their host plants, like huge Dieffenbachias, like these are things I call xanthosomas and bromelia or whatever they'll use will then grow in generally into these areas. So you see more of the poison frogs around an opening or a clearing, or a tree fall is another good spot. So they do pretty well in more disturbed forests, a lot of the species. And then, like I was saying, around the road, like there's so many. So this is really precipitous, kind of chaotically folded mountain range we're talking about. So there's streams that run, at regular intervals. There's a stream draining the mountains, so that'll eventually cross the road. So you climb up those streams. And so, even in the dry times, it's a real humid corridor that you can follow into the mountains, and then that's where the frogs will congregate, especially like the Amarega. They're always usually found closely associated with streams, the Bassari, the Cainarachis. I mean, Trivitata you'll find anywhere. You'll find them in the middle of towns. You'll find the tadpoles and footprints of hoof stalks. The frog is everywhere. It does not care about deforestation. It seems like it does better around settlements.
What species, sorry, is that?
Amarega trivitata, or the three-striped
Wow.
frog. It's a large neon green or yellow striped frog.
Is it sort of like every half an hour you're spotting one frog, or is it like you're walking up and you're seeing frogs constantly?
No, so in the right area, it's like relatively. I mean, every species is different. The ones you want to find, you never find, but you're always going to see trivitata if you're in the right habitat. You're in the right area, you're going to find trivitata quite easily, and then usually there's another associated Amarega that you'll like, Hanelli or Alta Amazonica. If you're, they're cryptic, but they're quite abundant. Imitator and the imitator complex, like Sorensis, if you're in the area, they're easy to find generally because you hear them first. But frogs like Fantastica, which just have a really soft and in a forest, almost an inaudible buzz call, those are the ones that are hard to find. So I always say you never find a Fantastica, they find you. Or eventually you walk around enough, you'll see one. And then, but they're so alert and they're so fast. I think half the ones are gone long before we realize they're there. But so it all depends on the species. But they're if you're in a good spot of forest where there's a good population, you're going to see quite a few. And the nice thing about Peru is that it's rare that Costa Rica, you might have one, or I think there's 5 or 6 species in the whole country. Or in Peru, you have places where you'll find 9 species in the same hectare of forest. It's crazy, and commonly 4 or 5 species. So it's nice that you're not just looking for one species. There's plenty to see usually.
You did just mention Costa Rica. I know you've done some work with the Costa Rican Amphibian Research Center.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe touch on that for a second?
Yeah, in the past, years ago now, yeah, Brian Kubicki from the CRARC would send me a few species, and I bred them here and split the proceeds with him. But yeah, I no longer work, unfortunately, with any of those. I did a heck of a lot of downsizing years ago, and just for various reasons. So, but yeah, for years we did I wouldn't say a lot, some good work with Brian. I have nothing but admiration for Brian and what he's done in Costa Rica. I think he's an amazing, incredible guy. What he's got, what he's accomplished down there is really impressive. And anyone going to Costa Rica, if you're into frogs, you don't go see the Costa Rican Amphibian Research Station. I mean, every postcard species in the country is pretty prevalent on his property there, and you're going to see them too. So
cool. Okay, so we'll jump off the frogs to the plants.
Yeah.
When did that start? When did the importing start up? And was it also linked to the same, like, are you also getting them from Manuel in Peru, or is it okay?
Yeah, so again, years and years ago, Manuel started process of a vivero and for plants, and it's a similar idea. You get the permits, you can collect your stock plants, and then you can grow them and propagate them, and then you can send them to me, and I do the same thing here. And I first, would get in. There's really well-known companies in Ecuador that do really phenomenal stuff on just a massive scale now that are exporting plants all over the world. So I would get in on imports from them initially, and I still do. And the idea with Peru was to get I don't want to focus on the big showy house plant. I don't want to do anything that has already been covered. I want to focus on the obscure ferns and the tiny philodendron, the small aeroids, kind of stuff that has been, I think, overlooked or maybe not focused upon by the other exporters up in Ecuador, and because that's what interests me. And then I think those also lend themselves well to terrarium use. So I think it's really cool now that finally we have some Peruvian site-specific plants that I know they came from the same forest that our frogs originated in, and I think it's kind of a neat opportunity for hobbyists to put together more or less biotope-specific terrariums, at least as far as the plants and frogs are concerned. So.
When I first started keeping dart frogs, I would always complain because there was no way I could find plants that would suit my vivariums. And this was way before I was even coming to the expos and seeing your booth. And so I would say I got very excited to finally see your booth and see the plants that you had available for sale, because it's exactly that. It's all the other plant sellers or anybody that's selling plants is usually very focused on house plants or things that survive, but nobody's focused on those tiny plants that look good in a small vivarium with a couple of frogs. So yeah, thank you for doing that.
It's been, honestly, what made me do it is I love it. I get huge kick out of the little fern. There's so much obscurities down there that I need 30 lifetimes to scratch the surface of the depth of diversity on a lot of this stuff. It's just fascinating to be able to get it, and you walk the more you look, the more you find too. And especially once you get into the mid-elevation forest, it's just an endless amount of interesting plants that are creeping around down there.
For sure. So I guess this goes for both the frogs and the plants. It's not a sort of the third generation that you're selling, or even they have the stock plants or frogs in Peru. They're breeding those. They're sending those over. And
so he'll collect a piece of a philodendron, and you know how they go. You just pull off collect your piece of this plant. You cut it down to the nodes. Before long, you got more plants to sell. It's really easy stuff. None of it's complicated. The ferns take sometimes a little more tinkering to get established. Some of the microgrammas and some of the elaphoglossums can be a little more sensitive. But yeah, it's the same idea. He's got a vivero license, and so he grows small amounts, ships them up to me, and then I keep them in quarantine for quite a while, make sure but they're all coming in clean and safe. But yeah, they come with their phytosanitary permits and all that stuff, and bring them into Toronto and go to the airport and pick them up, clear customs, and then several months later, hopefully I do well enough with them that I can start selling them. I kill the odd thing here and there, unfortunately.
For sure, it's how it goes.
The odd thing melts on you that you don't want. It's always the one you like the most too. But that's the name of the game with plants. So.
For sure. Awesome. Okay, so now that you have them all in Canada, and in your facility or whatever, what's the process like there? How long does it usually take from when you receive a frog and or plant to when usually you have them available for sale?
Usually
I guess plants, it varies.
Yeah, it varies. Frogs. So I get them in. I got to quarantine them usually. I usually keep them in quarantine for about 6 months just to make sure everything's good and there's never any problems. But just an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, as they say. So usually it's a good year before I can get around to having offspring. In a good case scenario, some stuff's a little more stubborn and doesn't breed right away, or it takes a while to for whatever reason start breeding. But usually it's a year to 14, 16 months. You get them grown up and to adult size and breeding, and then from the time you get an egg for Rhinita mea, for example, usually your egg stage is 2 weeks, then your tadpole stage is about 6 weeks, and then usually I like to grow them up 4 or 5 months till they're almost full grown before I sell them, because full size for Rhinita mea, for anyone that doesn't know, dart frogs is still not very big, so we like to get them pretty much to adult size, and then that gives them the best chance possible of making the trip and acclimating well in the new keeper's possession too. So
Yeah.
For plants, it's a similar, or not quite as long. Obviously, it all depends on the species. I mean, I've had ferns that that I bought even from Ecuador years ago that I don't think I've ever sold a piece of. I might have 4 new fronds in 5 years. Like some of these aloft blossoms, I don't know whether it's my care or yeah, I'm sure it is have to do with that or species. Some of them are just super slow growing, so it's kind of some stuff I'll probably never sell that I've got just because I'll never feel like I have it. It's kind of touch and go with some things, but generally the aeroids and stuff, and a lot of the microgammas, it's probably close to a year before I, feel like I've got enough to start offering it on the market. So
Awesome. Very, very cool. Okay, so you mentioned Ranatomea there.
yeah,
How do you, what's your general, and I guess this also varies depending on species, but what's your general Ranatomea breeding setup like? Are you doing pairs? Are you doing groups?
all always done Ranatomea in groups.
Groups. Okay.
Yeah, I've always so with I would especially stuff I bred and then I build groups that way. I would always take 4 to 6 what I thought looked like a nice group as juveniles and throw them into a terrarium, usually 10 to 20 gallon or a 16-inch cube size tank, smaller terrariums. And the sexes will fall out where they may, and usually they get a good breeding group that way. But I've always done well with them in groups and smaller terrariums. So
Awesome. And do you use like film canisters as well
yeah,
for them to lay their eggs in?
yeah, a lot of film casters still. A lot of species are like imitator. They'll glue their eggs on the behind a leaf on the glass, so you got to kind of scrape them off in those situations. But yeah, breeding them as long as you got enough food, it's no issue to reproduce any of these things.
Yeah, and so you do pull the eggs, then you don't wait for them to become tadpoles.
No, I pull them when I find them, but you're constantly chasing a tadpole out of your water reservoir or something too, if you choose to. I mean, they always get stuff past you, especially like the imitator and stuff. They're pretty sneaky, so you often see a male with a tadpole on his back. Yeah, when I find eggs, I pull them and raise them that way, just because the way exports and everything work, I need to know my stock or what I'm going to have. So I know if I have a tadpole, there's a really good chance in a few months I'm going to have a froglet to sell. So we got a lot of countries, they need to get an import permit based on our export permit. So we're often working 6 to 8 months in advance with some of our buyers. So we have to be able to project what we're going to have. So if I just left it all to chance, I'd never know accurately more or less what I'm going to have to be able to, then sell these. So
Right.
it's just inventory management essentially a little easier if I pull them. So.
No, that makes sense. And do you find that and maybe this is a all dart frog question or maybe specifically Rantomea, do you find that they're seasonal with their
Um,
breeding?
Not so much. No, like what I do is we dry them out. So we reduce spraying for several months at a time because they'll continue to breed. But I worry about, I think that's stressful for
For sure.
long term. I don't think that's good for the females. So that's why I like to have, 3 or 4 breeding groups often, or when I can, each kind. So I have one breeding and then 1 or 2 cycling, or 2 breeding, 1 cycling kind of thing. So give the females a rest because they will breed year long if you let them. But I think you're going to see. I don't think that's good for the overall health of the females. I don't think it bothers the males any, but for the females, putting out all those eggs constantly because they don't breed year long in the wild. There is a rest period for sure when it dries out. So I think that should be considered in captivity as well.
That's interesting. My tinctorius I do give them a rest period as well. Like I do the dry cycle as well for a couple
Mhm.
of months. But if I don't, they will breed year round, almost
Yeah,
nonstop. So my Philobades will do the same thing.
yeah,
But I only have the Ranatomea vanzellini or
yeah.
vanzellini
That's
or
a good choice.
yeah. From you actually.
Oh,
And it seems like they'll breed for 2 months and then stop for several months and breed again for 2 months and stuff. So I'm not sure either if it's my care, if I'm doing something wrong,
no,
or if
it's
they're just
some of
seasonal.
them will take breaks often too. And that's a good thing. I think, yeah, we often hear that from people. Why they stop breeding? Well, I think if the animals are healthy and it's probably good. They're regulating and it's nothing to worry about. That's what they should be doing, I think. So, but yeah, you get guys like Tinctorius and stuff too. They're crazy for wanting to breed. I mean, when they settle in, I mean, you'll find pairs every 5 days. It's amazing what they'll want to pound out. So you got to slow them down for sure because I think it will lead to detrimental effects on the females over time. I'm not sure how long it would take, but I think it's definitely a good idea to rest those frogs.
Yeah, and do you think that it might have also affect the tadpoles?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of times, like, we don't see much spindly leg, but when I do see it, I often, I always go back. I don't think it's an issue with my water or issue or anything. I go back on it. If I ever do see spindly leg, I don't know it's time to, for sure, or long past time to rest that pair. Because that means I always think that issues like that, you can trace it right back to the health of the female or your breeding stock. I don't think it's a tadpole issue. I think it's an issue that goes back to the quality of the eggs that are being produced. I think the female is just overbred and needs a good rest and time to build up, reserves again. So.
Yeah, makes sense. What's your supplementation like? What do you use for supplements, and what is your cycle like?
Yeah, I use Repashy stuff. So I use the Calcium Plus pretty near every feeding, and again, keep in mind we feed every other day. And then I add in about every 10 days to 2 weeks the vitamin multivitamin one. I can't remember the exact name of that. And
Supervite, yeah.
Supervite, yeah, thank you. Jeez,
Yeah.
I use it every frequently. And then vitamin A about every 3 weeks to a month. I'm not religious about any of this. It's just, more or less for all this stuff. But
yeah, that makes sense.
That's my rotation for the three supplements. But I only use Repashy supplements.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems that it is like probably my favorite supplements. I use it with all my animals, but it
Yeah,
also seems like it's probably the easiest one out of all the more dart frog specific ones to get here in Canada.
yeah. It's well widely available, and I think quite a good product. I've been using it for years now. I'm really happy with it. So.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so you just said feeding every other day.
Yeah, well, a lot of times froglets will feed something
Daily.
every day. Like one day will be a spring when they're young. One day will get springtails. The next day will get flies, kind of thing. But the breeders and then froglets that are long out of the sensitive froglet stage that got some good beef on them and all that, and they'll get it every other day. So
Awesome,
and
but
then
feeding that many. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
all our breeders are every other day.
Yeah, well, so feeding that many frogs every other day means you go through a lot of fruit flies.
Yeah, we use quite a few flies. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
How do
naturally.
you manage, like keeping it on schedule and not crashing all your cultures? Is it religiously weekly you're
Yeah,
making cultures, or
every
yeah?
week, the same Monday's culture making day. We'll let them sit for 48 hours. Wednesday, throwing the new flies into the freshly set up cultures, and then that way you never run out. And then we have our own room just for flies, so it's kept stable. So there's no, swings. People have some problem with the change of the seasons. Like I try to mitigate that as best as possible. So, yeah, we don't leave a lot to chance. We got a lot of frogs to feed. You can't have culture crashes. So when I set up, I don't know how many we set up every week anymore, but doing over 700 at one point, and now we're maybe 100 and maybe close to 100 a week or something. So
Did you say 700 every
I
week?
think at our peak, like this is 2015 or something, or 2013 when we had that. Probably when we produced more than we ever did. There's a couple of crazy years when we were shipping a lot to Europe, and I had a lot of Mantella breeding back then too. So we went through a lot of flies. But now I consider myself semi-retired. So,
Yeah.
but I don't have near the amount of frogs I used to, which is good. I'm enjoying it, being a little more focused, and
Yeah.
having more fun building terrariums again. And looking forward to building some bigger terrariums. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with, especially in Canada. There's some great, really inspirational guys like Indra and Alex Majutera, and then Braden Weisberg.
Yeah.
I think I just butchered his name. I'm sorry if he's listening, but some really interesting, inspiring stuff going on in Canada with the terrarium stuff. So I'm excited to build some larger ones, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So.
That's awesome. And you're sort of focusing. You said you're, I guess, on certain species. What are the species you were hoping to or are currently focusing on? Or like, no,
Well, I'm
obviously not
just
all of them, but like kind of what
dart
direction are you
frogs,
hoping to
and
take?
specifically like Denver based. So I got, you have to have, my favorites are Renidomea.
Okay. Yeah.
Always be my favorites. Then we've got all their, I call the bread and butter species that you need to have for the market, the worldwide market. Like Azurias, you need that frog because everyone wants the blue frog.
Everyone wants the blue frog. Yeah.
And what I'm looking forward to working with now are some of the larger Ophaga again. So I'll keep some Sylvatica from the Waikiri imports. So that's why I'm building larger tanks. And then again, these guys like Indra Press. I'm not even gonna try and say his last name. He's looking. He knows what I'm talking about. But and there's Alec Brown and those guys, and Chris Stewart keeping the larger Ophaga. I've been talking to him a lot. It's pretty pretty impressive the success they're having. So I'm excited to work with those again. I haven't kept Sylvatica in years, so I'm pretty excited for that again, and try and pick up different Camellia that are around when I can. But yeah, so it's been a long time since I worked with the Ophiga, so I'm looking forward to that. It's always good to have new challenges and mix things up. But yeah, mostly I'm excited to build bigger terrariums and to get all the plants and growing nicely and working with airflow and tinkering again. So
Yeah, no, definitely. It's interesting. I know they're like more of a tough species to breed and to get out in larger quantities. Do you think you'll ever be able to actually have them on the market, or do you think it's going to be a species you're sort of just trading with fellow hobbyists kind of thing?
they'll never, just by their nature, you're not going to produce any obligate like you do a tinctorius or even a renningamia.
Yeah.
But for sure, I mean, yeah, they can be bred, they can be traded beyond just with groups. Like these people are, breeding. I'm surprised how well they're doing with large obligates in Canada. But I think, I mean, the States, everywhere, there's so many people now breeding histrionica and lamani, all the stuff out of the Soros project.
Yeah.
The stuff that I never thought, 10 years ago I would, or I don't know, I guess it's been coming in probably for 10 years now. But, when I got started, like stuff like histrionica and lamani, those are, unheard of grail species, and that now there's not just one morph, there's dozens of morphs. It's crazy, and people are having really good success. It's stuff that I honestly thought I'd never see that many being bred, but again, it just shows you when you get quality imports coming in. Like these are, these projects have done good jobs producing quality animals, and that makes all the difference. So these frogs aren't actually impossible to keep. It's just they're finally the hobby had access to really good quality stock, and then I think that makes all the difference. So yeah, all the credit's got to go to these, like Erie and Tesoros and those guys for putting out, really, really good quality stuff that allows hobbyists access to these dream animals that, without the headache of, traditional, imports from the 80s or 90s when it was, it was a different story of the stuff coming in. Then you had to really nurse it along and cross your fingers and, really, hope that you get a good group out of something. So.
No, that 100% makes sense. And of course, with giving them their credit, we got to give you your credit as well, because we wouldn't be able to have them here as hobbyists without,
A good man,
people
well,
like
the
you.
credit.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you very, very much for doing this. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I've been super excited to start Dark Frogs with you for a long time, and
Yeah, man.
truly, it's an honor to have you on here. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
For
Appreciate
sure.
it. Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
talking.
Yeah, yeah, likewise. Can you let everybody know if they want to keep up with you, where they can find you, and all of that?
Oh, I should have been prepared. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Understory Enterprises Inc. I don't even know, man. They'll find me.
I'll
Yeah,
put all
plug
the
me in
links
there.
in the description, and also check out the website. Go check out the blogs.
Yeah.
Reading them in like story form is always super enjoyable. So definitely
Well,
check out the blogs on the website.
thanks, man. I
And
appreciate it. Trying to get more of those up too. We do have a new website, hopefully up by April. So
awesome. I'm
yeah,
looking forward to it,
yeah,
and hopefully we'll see you at
I'll be
the
there.
expo in a
Yeah,
couple of weeks.
yeah. I'll talk
Awesome.
to you.
So yeah, yeah, go check out his booth at the expo, and yeah, we'll talk to you then, man. Thank
Thanks,
you
Todd.
very much.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Awesome. So I am Daffy's Reptiles on all social media platforms. Daffy's Roundtable for the podcast. Thank you once again to Mark for coming on. This was a super awesome episode, and yeah, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.